So, welcome to this second session on writing endeavours and practicing. My name is Gayle Letherby. I'm really delighted to be chairing this session. We've had a little bit of feedback from our colleagues online. First, we must apologise. We lost you for about 3 minutes in the last session, so we're really sorry about that. There have been some comments about finding it quite difficult to hear. So if you're presenting, but also if you're asking a question, if you could speak really clearly, that would be good. If you're happy to stand up when you ask your question, that would be better. Don't have to do it, but if you're, and it would be also really nice if when you ask the question, you just said your name. So then again, it's a bit more inclusive. Okay. So we have 4 papers in this hour, and as per normal, we'll take the 4 papers and then we'll have some discussion. So our first paper is by Esther van Walt, How Maternal Ambivalence and a Midlife Epiphany Led to Writing an Auto-Inspired Ph.D. Esther.
Thank you, Gayle. But it was close. Okay, midlife and all, I'm not sure which pair of glasses will work best, so bear with me. Today, you will hear a version of my story and how a heap of seemingly loose ends and a lifetime's experiences amalgamated into a midlife epiphany, producing my current auto-inspired feminist PhD study on maternal identity as a social construct. The autobiography, positionality, researcher's reflexivity are core factors in acknowledging her relationship with the data, research participants, and knowledge creation. Writing my story is an attempt to own my subjective position and the way in which I shaped the final thesis. My partner and I were conversing at the breakfast table the other morning, yet again, on the dilemma of writing about family and the role or not of censorship in it. To write about one's family is without doubt the surest means of falling out with them. British novelist Rachel Cusk quotes French novelist Delphine de Vigan in a New York Times long read. The interim outcome of this most recent over toast and coffee conversation was that I have enough material to write. Maybe not enough freedom to drop the censorship just yet, and therefore I should at least, albeit secretly, start gathering the 50-odd years worth of lived data in preparation of a future freely written project. Raw data, that is. Later that day, I gathered myself and I opened the humongous leather coffer filled to the brim with personal journals. Those ones that one would use as raw data if one should ever decide to write about one's family and oneself. The oldest of the journals, the one dated 1987, produced the following. Winter. The howling wind is icy. It cuts through my thick sheep wool jacket. In my memories, I see the warm sitting room with the fireplace as nice as can be. I feel the Milo down my throat. It's like Horlicks. I don't know if you have Milo here. Warming my iced body. I feel his breath in my neck, his soft hands in mine. Oh God, please make this memory real, please. At the time of writing, I was an Afrikaans-speaking 14-year-old girl. Although I had the romance for the role, I do not remember thinking of myself as a potential poet at that tender age. I absolutely, definitely, positively did not intend to ever use this little literary work in any conference paper whatsoever. This voice was a shameful secret. Time moved on, and I should hope that my voice did too. What did not change until very recently was the fact that my writing had a secret life in that coffer without permission to exist anywhere else. The decision to insert the poem into this paper was not taken lightly. When I read it, I cringed, giggled, secretly closed the book, panicked a bit and giggled some more, afraid that some judge or even just a normal person would peek over my shoulder to read my 14-year-old heart. The problem was the shame and the non-permission to speak. I was not alone, as is evident in the commands of feminists as far back as 12th century philosopher Hildegard of Bingen, and more recently Virginia Woolf, Ellen Sixu, Bell Hooks, Adrian Ridge, and many, many others before and since. One single message is simple and consistent. Women are to write for this story to change. Unpacking the psychology of this shame has been my life work, with midlife sub-themes of maternal identity and ambivalence, and a dramatic epiphany that followed the weaning of my youngest child, that my story actually has enough merit to be written down. It's a long story, and because of the time limitations of this paper, I will only offer a few clues. 1, patriarchy. I know it is to be blamed for everything nowadays, but it really is. The fact that a young adolescent girl feels ashamed of her femaleness and her singleness, her yearning for a boyfriend, is the fault of a male-designed psychoanalysis in which the basic premise is set to be girls being anatomically incomplete, lacking, and envious of boys for the fact that they have penises and we don't. A second clue lies in the women and children subsection of that same patriarchal society. It was in the weaning of my son, he was almost 3 and I 42 years old, that I felt for the first time ever that I was a separate human woman, a full human being in my own right. 3 years ago, I landed a scholarship for a doctoral study. I had no academic writing voice, distinctly different from my own. So I needed permission from someone to write a Ph.D. in my own voice. I bumped into an autobiographer and serious academic at this autoethnography conference in July 2021. I was overwhelmingly surprised at her interest in my study and my voice. A third clue was the coincidental meeting of said supervisor and the beginning of a new relationship with my now life partner, who share a sincere interest in my voice, my growth, my well-being, my story. Of course, the little man voice in the back of my mind immediately asks why I would need others' permission to write. For now, I will accept the belief that I needed permission to write and celebrate the relationships within which I'm experiencing it nowadays. And I'm inquiring on that elsewhere. The fourth clue lies in the oracle. She started guiding me through my night dreams from the time of my son's weaning. I had never before then experienced the strange delight of writing down dreams while fast asleep, and waking up the next morning to reading them as if for the first time. During the last 3 years, the oracle gifted me with dozens of dream journals, filled with stories of blank books, clean canvases, prepared pizza bases, empty ovens and fridges, stone tablets, all ready to be filled with my own stories as they develop. As part of this midlife experience, or maybe read crisis, rather liberation, I've broken most of the interesting customary and societal rules of my cultural and time context, and I see myself as a relatively free woman. Yet, I'm not free to write about it without sufficient censorship to dodge the bullet, or the unapologetic openness that will more than likely lead to shame and guilt. In other words, the bullet. I still do not know exactly what to write and what not, as my family, who are all still alive, will always be the central characters. I have a feeling that the permission to write more freely will grow as I grow older. For now, this specifically focused, specifically focused on my study on maternal identity. I'm safely blurring the lines between my own story, the stories of my 8 research participants, and those of a few compound characters within every woman voice. The effect is on some readers that there will be a deeper understanding of a larger group of mothers' internal worlds. And on other readers, it will be the recognition of a familiar voice. A sense of, I am not alone. There are other mothers with experiences that resemble mine. Women are to write for this story to change. So, with one voice, an ensemble, an orchestra at a time, this story will change.
Thank you. Our second paper is by Tim. Do I know how to pronounce your second name?
Buescher.
Buescher, okay, thank you. And Mel Perry. Yes, we met online, but not on Tinder. Holding hands in the bar.
Two times. Holding hands in the dark. Being brave enough to stay or enter into the dark with its secrets, regrets, and dangers. We hold hands, gathering in the dark what can only be found there. Deep Welsh code. Holding hands, we give each other the bravery to step forward into the light, to be seen in new spaces, to be heard. We hold hands with words. The words fit together like palms. I'm here.
I am here.
Centenary.
60 years on.
Start shirt, stand straight.
Brown tunic, yellow tie.
Brasso belt buckle.
Another brasso buckle.
Buff black boots.
Polished sandals.
Haversack.
Hat shield, promise band.
Lanyard.
Toadstool.
Armbands.
Sperry.
Cap.
Owl.
By the left. Quick. March.
Gather round, take your neighbour's hand. We meet online. We meet online for sure, but not through some dating app. We meet online as part of a conference planning group. Will we click? Well, I like to think we click.
I felt some kind of affinity and I really liked your style. I love talking to you. We talked some more after the conference and had lots of fun meandering.
We share stories of work and expectations, aspirations, and you become the intellectual challenge and stimulus I crave. At your encouragement, I came to ICA in 2022, right to Rome. It was a cool white wine, a fresh crab salad, a late samba on the quayside, a zest that spangled my synapses.
Yeah. We meet but rarely in the real world, and it's a shame, but it is such a joy.
That moment of vague patchouli and fenugreek, lavender and geranium scent as we hugged and said goodbye, and you took the 1857 train home.
I suggest we write to each other, communicating in poetry. Perhaps you said that. With a view to putting something together for this year's conference. Did I say that? Yes. That's been hard to do. But with the momentum of good conversation and a supportive friendship, I've found I can overcome my fear of saying what's on the tip of my tongue.
We continue to meet, to begin poeming to each other. We pick up on each other's explorations of family and ancestral stories, intergenerational guilt, your paternal grandfather, my maternal grandparents. We share poems, find joy in silence, more joy in breaking silences.
We read together from our poetic dialogue at the Coracle Europe Festival, and it feels perfectly normal. Sounds familiar. Blindly, I hack away, chisel, gnawing and nibbling at my family tree. Looking for what? For whom? Scratching like a cat at a locked door, making marks of my social desires. Maybe in here's the answer. Following the tracks of the greats on the family album. The Stoics, the builders, the leaders, the honest to God workers, those who knew and did right. All those number ones, the floor fillers, the power ballads, the anthems.
Your metaphors for this process of writing about family send their roots along my seal highways to seed my poem, Family Trees. I noticed staccato actions of a carpenter learning to handle his material as he writes questions from his heartwood. I too chip, chisel, seek the stoic in me. I find my family's hardship, sacrifice, leadership, and service in their xylem and flowing. I wonder where the rot and worm of judgment took hold of you, how he halts my brown blood. Our stories cannot be planed, sanded, or polished. There are knots in our grain, twists in our timbers, splinters that fall, catch us, rise in all our saps.
Audience members say of our shared reading, so much more of a conversation than a dialogue. Poetic harmony, its consonances, and productive dissonances.
Your poem, Brown to Blue, prompted imaginings of my grandpa, of which I wrote in his gifts.
Crossed over the knee, sitting at the kitchen table, or bent high as he sat on the back step.
I remember his crimson striped pajama top, the pale green leaf embroidered cotton counterpane as he lay in the iron bed with its swiveling plasters.
Maybe this is what we need to know. In writing, do we grow resilience from our ancestral legacies?
Even though I haven't replied to you, my lived experience is yes.
We muse on what makes a good piece of writing, academically, aesthetically, ethically. One product of this was your genre-busting paper for lyric, which intimidated and inspired me with its creativity.
You never said no to my ideas. You always said, why not? You opened up the nerves and fibres of my brain. You pushed me in the gentlest way to re-genre my dissertation. And that process took me closer to those women alongside whom I had worked, closer in confidence to myself.
When I was at the lowest of the lows, you sent poems, loads of them. Poets and their poems by post, signed for me. I feel like my practitioner self in your company.
I feel like my researcher self in your company. I'm at the edge of a cliff, the dolerite of the Great Wind Sill, the limestone of Malham, on the edge with an array of colourful market stalls, tents in the field of a cloth of gold. Each tent stall offers invitations to new directions in life, to write, to travel, to express, to trouble, to liberate and be liberated by writing and inquiry.
We share new and old discoveries of literature and theory, growing the pool of ideas into which we cast our rods. Thank you for Hiraeth and Fernview, if I did that all right. With which I've been able to understand and express something which I've never been able to voice before. We offer each other new resources, to stock of stories from which we can each draw on grows.
These sessions of reciprocal nurture with a softly contoured structure, finding resonances in our family stories, therapeutic writing, stimulus, friendship, listening, permitting, giving air and space in conversation, flight to ideas, a conduit to confidence. Sometimes forgetting, but deep down, never forgotten, always remembered, never letting go or letting down.
We falter. Don't get me wrong, we're human after all, but we put one word after another, holding hands, One pulls the other up when it gets tough, and we're assured of each other's presence when inner critics breathe down our necks. And if it gets difficult, scary, or one closes their eyes, the other one guides.
This black ink script on my paint-stained pages is wrapped around the piece I wrote with you in Sheffield's Cafe Newman. That piece when you said I was a good listener and good in a crisis is the passion-curd and masterful filling in this right. This glorious sugar donut shared with you. I choose. I prefer to write this out in black ink. Not delible pencil as if I won't, but black ink, the marks of a friendship that will not be erased.
We hold hands with words.
The words sit together
like palms.
Well, a wonderful conversation indeed. I for one am so glad in there. Lovely, lovely. Okay, I'll move into our third paper. So it's Edwina Morris who's going to give us a peek at how it's doing.
Thanks very much, Gayle. My paper is about a conversation with my best friend, and we were talking about our experiences in the operating theatre. My best friend Ruby and I were at a health spa, sitting in a jacuzzi, relaxing. The water was bubbling around us, and the noises of the swimming pool were fading into the background. My friend, like myself, had commenced in the NHS back in 1974. We were cadet nurses. We worked in different outpatient departments, filing mostly. We couldn't wait to get on the wards and do real nursing. We commenced our training in 1975, and we did a 2-year orthopaedic course. We both passed. And then we went off to different hospitals to do our general nurse training. You know, back in the day where we had real aprons, hats, cloaks, silver buckles, childhood dreams fulfilled. We passed and we were SRMs. Ruby went on to do her midwifery training. I progressed into motherhood. How's the study going? Said Ruby. Ruby was asking about my research work, which was like a demanding child, always needing attention, seeking understanding. Ruby knew my frustrations. Yeah, okay, I said. And it's difficult to pick out what they're actually learning. She said, maybe they don't know. They're telling me about their experiences in theatre. Can you remember what it was like for you? I asked Ruby. I can't imagine how anyone would want to work in there. I've no idea how you've done it for all this year, said Ruby, looking at me. Okay, but did you learn anything? Nothing, replied Ruby, nothing at all. And then I did actually I did learn something. It was a dreadful place. Why? I said, what was so awful? It was because we were all experienced on the ward and around the hospital. We knew what to do, we knew the routine, we knew who was who, and we knew all about the equipment and how to use it, where to find it. But theatre was different. We were in a place where we knew nothing. We were lost in the dark. And there was a smell, I said. Oh yeah, said Ruby, that good old mixture of burning flesh and antiseptic. I can remember when we were shown around in our orthopaedic train, actually someone fainted just by walking into the room. Do you remember, said Ruby? Oh yeah, I said, racking my brains for the name of the person. I can't remember her name. Can you, Ruby? No, she said, but I remember the incident and thinking, oh, I hope I don't do that. But luckily, during my orthopaedic training, I didn't have to go in. I did A&E instead. It was brilliant, but in my general training, I couldn't avoid it. I had to go in. Do you wish that you'd avoided it? I asked. Oh, definitely. There was no benefit for me at all, she said. Was it the thought of passing out? I asked. Well, maybe a little, she said, but it was much more than that. What do you mean? I asked. Well, there was nothing that I knew from my training or experience that was any use. It's an alien landscape with alien inhabitants, all speaking a foreign language. Oh, that's a bit strong, isn't it? I said. No, not at all. There was no knowledge that I had that was any use. There was nowhere like it that I'd ever experienced before. There were muffled voices that emerged from behind masks and orders barked at us that we couldn't understand. Were any good bits? I asked. Yeah, she said. I remember that my time in the operating theatre was reduced, said Ruby very quickly. We laughed and there was a pause while we both relaxed back into the frothy bubbles. The jacuzzi cycle had ended and a silence followed. Ruby broke the silence. You know, I think I was worried that someone would ask me something. Ah, I said, so you were worried about the lack of knowledge? Yeah, it was more than that. I was worried about being exposed. You know, like a bad dream, nightmare where you find yourself naked in public. Really? I said. Oh, yeah. In the wards, we were covered. We'd got some idea of what was going on. And if you weren't sure, you knew how to ask. It was so different in theatre. I reflected on this level of certainty that Ruby had. I don't think I ever possessed that. I was okay working in theatre. The environment of uncertainty was normal for me. I couldn't remember. Did it ever bother me? Theatre is just full of potential change. Patient situations can develop really quickly, impacting on the acuity of their situation. Operative procedures change. They develop and progress in complexity. There was a thoughtful pause broken by the gurgle from the jacuzzi. Ruby adjusted her position in the water and said, I'd had loads of experience, but going into theatre was just like starting all over again. Everything I feared was quickly confirmed. I was belittled, humiliated, made to feel completely useless and stupid. The staff in theatre who noticed me at all would look at me as if I'd crawled out from under a rock. Ruby paused for breath. Thankfully, I wasn't noticed that often. I was introduced as the student, and from that day onwards, that was my name. I was told to stand in the corner and don't come close, don't touch the sterile field, not that I knew what that was anyway. And we were sent for coffee and no one in the staff room would talk to us. In fact, you were lucky if you could find anywhere to sit down. Oh, that's awful, I said. Didn't you feel like that, said Ruby. No, I said, no, I didn't. In fact, where I was, the students were singled out to do stuff. Everyone knew who you were, even at times you wish they didn't. Oh, said Ruby, I spent my whole 6 weeks dread of being spoken to. I didn't learn anything. I didn't ask any questions. I didn't dare. Ruby went quiet and shut her eyes, and then she laughed and said, oh, I do remember one thing. I was asked to get an instrument. I can't remember what it was now, but I ran off to look for it. But I didn't have the first clue what I was looking for. I remember that. I said, I've done that. Said Ruby, then you have to go back and ask. And it's so embarrassing. Did anyone tell you what it was? No. They explained when I went back in, as if they were trying to make me look a fool. Ruby sunk a little lower into the bubbles, as if more deflated by remembering the experience. I can remember when that happened to me. I said, hoping to make Ruby feel better. I didn't go back in. I just hung around in the storeroom, sort of looking aimlessly about until someone come to find me. And they said, have you got it yet? To which I said, no. And they tutted and grabbed it. It was right in front of me and went back in. So I sort of sauntered in afterwards. We both laughed. The other thing I remember, said Ruby, sorry, more negative stuff. Can't think of anything positive. Was the day someone asked me to move the light, the operating light. And it was because I was the only one in there. The surgeon looked up and said, can you reposition the light? Well, I reached up to grab the overhead light and the scrub sister screamed at me and said I was going to kill the patient because I was about to desterilize her trolley. I was nowhere near the trolley. A very kind anaesthetist saw that I was in trouble and moved the light for me. He was a lot closer to the sterile field than I'd been, and she didn't scream at him. No happy memories then, I said. No, said my friend, I was lost. It was a completely awful experience and one I could have done without. It undermined my confidence. You're made to feel about 2 inches tall. It seems that theatre knowledge is very specialist and held very firmly by those that possess it. And looking at me said, hope you weren't like that. I shook my head, but I felt uncomfortable. I was like, was I like that? I couldn't be sure. On the wards, said Ruby, we were used to nursing patients. Theatres were different. It appeared to me that the focus was on looking after the consultants. So I said, maybe you did learn something. Thank you.
Lovely, lovely. And now we have Mary Garland, Fragments of Writing Waiting.
I imagine I've heard Kevin Down's paper before I wrote this one. The concept of anarchizing opens up new possibilities for writing, with fragments of writing waiting. But that's exactly what I'm hoping for by bringing this paper here. Evan Manning asked, what else? What else is there after the official end of a much-loved PhD? Submitting the abstract for this paper felt risky. A challenge to write something new after 8 years. Of course, the writing did not stop with the submission of the thesis. And so logically, what else is a return to that writing, waiting in file? And that's as far as the abstract went. And so I finished all the writing, read through it, write a prelude, and suddenly the writing is taking off again, as I hoped it would. But there are 24 sides of A4. And only 8 minutes to put that. Well, the diary entries can be summarised. They reflect the period of grief, bereavement, as a much-loved friend is forced to an official end before it is ready, and of much-loved PhD supervision session in Scotland. Of course, there was happiness too. The period has been on some kind of weird high, but the turbulent year followed, in which Manning's question offered hope, as did some collaborative writing shared together here last year. And so, despite almost a decade of writing, reading, thinking, doing, apparently ending, writing has continued flowing, and it's exciting that those fragments waiting in word files, possibly dormant, probably not, are waiting, and so to soon know what, as Manning said, to writing is after. The writing post-submission of the thesis, one is highly prepared for a viva on the work, which lovingly shaped and crafted into reluctant submission, is not finished. It asks what the viva is, the end of a wonderful dream, lived for several years, or a beginning, to standing on the edge of whatever, as Kate Atson. The last says there are no beginnings or endings, so it's neither of those. Whatever it is, there's a start need also to prepare for becoming Mary, not the PhD student, not the researcher, but that's too painful. And of course, writing flow from the B-Day itself, the word "five" is too scary to write on Thursday, 13th of January 2022, can being overcome by a strange sensation of calm, of peace, engulfing the assemblage after a troubled sleepless night, the sudden realization that somehow the 20-year dream of simply being a PhD student has turned into a nightmare, clicking on a link to be examined. But what else is there in those word files apart from diary entries conveying schadenfreude and the impossibility of finding fulfillment after much love PhD? And how will those writings connect? Perhaps it's middle of the file, the connection. The less says it's what happens in between points that's important. Perhaps this is the cohesive thread that will hold this becoming sequel together. How can it be held together was the last question about my PhD thesis. It will probably be the last question about the sequel too, because with writing flowing, the intention is to, as the lesson entirely suggests, institute a new plane of eminence, and let it slip into a plane of composition, and just see what concepts and writing will be created. And hand to the manner, let them find their own connections together. There's a sense somehow of this plane being what Liz Stone described as the PhD supervisory advantage. It's in for thin, perhaps, supporting newly emerging writing and writer post-PhD. Quote, the art of constructing problem is very important. You invent a problem position, before finding a solution. I like that Deleuze doesn't wish to reflect on what is past, but rather about what we are doing now. So perhaps that is what this paper is doing, constructing a problem, the problem of what to do is posed by the writing, and perhaps having done that, there are imperceptible shifts becoming sequel, and perhaps the writing is standing between them as a diversity and broken line, shooting between two proliferating tentacles. There's a sensing, however, of multiple lines intentional, making their way into the world in these fragments, and also something passing between them. The nerves start to be careful, perhaps. It's hard to move on to something new when you're still in love with the thesis, the book just published. There's no doubt there that a companion book is emerging, with just a gentle knowing of what this writing might be after, as what Gayle might refer to as the affective presence of the thesis, mobilised and sorted. In fragments on the mobile phone, tapped out night and day, copied and pasted into Word, email, are now happily making their way into the world in imminence. Is it disloyal to be thinking about writing something else? Writing to is posed by a middling fan, that the PhD writers are listening to see what connections they might make. There's a sense of joy that's been absent for a while. There's also a desire to do something with that writing that continues to flow, even in those darkest days, stuck in the post-PhD liminal space outside of the academy, only able to occasionally, as Stefano Harney said, mostly suggest, sneak in and steal everything possible. Some of the characters in the book are re-emerging in these fragments. Paula, Mary's imaginary fellow PhD student, completes her studies a few months later. The two contemplate what else they can do, as they find themselves adrift respectively inside and outside of the academy, demanding a clear detailed project. How can they possibly return to using neoliberal ways of thinking and doing, having the Elizabeth Saint-Pierre, Manning, Brian Seeley, Gayle, and Jonathan White embrace experimental and speculative writing practices? And since post-qualitative inquiry, such as story and research creation, are needed to create opportunities for change, why is it seemingly so difficult for former PhD students like them to continue to engage in research in this way, as they strive to make a difference in education? Starting a new job a few months ago on the edge of the academy, supporting higher education students with academic writing, it isn't long before frustration surfaced, but being expected to teach that language must be formal, concise, and represent what is, rather than speculate about what else. Planning a workshop on academic and professional writing skills, deliberating over how far conventional practice can be deviated from, in my advice for my ex-director studies, work with what you learned and what you believe to be right. A smile. Instead of knowing, of course there can't be a writing workshop without introducing writers inquiry. And because of that, that workshop feels like the best session ever. The participants disbelieve from the first reading of the quotation deeply balances after experiencing for themselves that his manuscript, writing only knows that it's after once it has begun to make its way into the world. And that, as Mosini suggests, writing can surprise the writer. When planning the free writing activity, writing about ideas for a potential Ph.D. for first and undergraduates was not being considered. But that is what entered the room. It happened in the movement, in writing, in act. It was what I have learned. It was what I believe to be right. I've seen it in action in the classroom now, and I want others to experience it too. And so yes, the companion book could also challenge academic writing conventions and structure, which acts as barriers to learning for so many. With St. Pierre was supposed to catch, but not yet glimmering seductively, and thus could create genuine second chances in education for all. As the fig tree over Shafak's novel, The Island of Missing Trees, stories come to us not in their entirety, but in bits and pieces, broken segments, and partial echoes. A full sentence here, a fragment there, a clue hidden in between. The movement matters, not the finished product. Writing does, and the sequel accepts the risk of writing, as Mosini would say, starting movement from the beginning. And perhaps that is the difference. Letting the writing be, finding its own ways wandering into this world from those files, no longer fragments waiting, but fragments flying into conversations about practices of writing. Fragments exemplifying how writing can trouble, experiment and speculate, fixing and not yet knowing, enabling the reorienting of pedagogy within the academy. Thank you for listening.
There are lots of connections for I'd like to invite our speakers to take the stage again, if that's okay. I've got some time for questions, just remind you, please speak up and say your name when you're asking the question. That would be really nice. So you will get the copies. You have to share it. Yeah. Yeah, so that was more. Too many. Okay, really lovely.
Thank you so much.
Your name?
Sorry, Willis. I've heard been mentioned a few times to Mary. Could you explain to somebody like who is Erin Mami? What is meant by the power?
And to be honest, I'd like to pass over to Ken and Dan if I can. I've heard a bit, but them speaking about like their writing going across the Atlantic and past writing that they were sort of bringing alive again and writing to really made me think that I could bring that into this, what I'm trying to do with past writing, making it fast. So I'm going to pass to them for that one.
Well, that's pretty good, Mary.
Did you like that, Ken?
Erin Mannix is a Canadian scholar. She is running two projects in Canada. One called Sense Lab, which you can check on Google, and also one called the Three Ecologies Project. And it's a sort of immersive space with a theoretical and a practical meet. So they're farming and they're writing with her partner, Brian and Sumi. She's invented lots. She's written a number of really, really wonderful books. It's actually going to be a an examiner of Paula, who Mary mentioned, of her PhD. What's in? Is Paula reading? No, she's a student. Mary.
I wonder who you think Paula is. Paula is Yeah, these are kind of what I call composite self, in that I suppose I take bits from different people and bring them together, and it's a sort of creation.
So basically, just without creating a kind of binary, the anarchive is a kind of amalgam of forces and energies that are out there. They can be sort of affective, they can be material or whatever. And a bit like in a museum, the decision has to be made how to archive something, how to put it up on the shelf. So Manny said there is always a play between what's downstairs in the store cupboard, and what comes up into the gallery. So I think that's what you're alluding to, Miriam.
Yeah.
My question for Tim is Mel.
Your name?
Oh, sorry, my name is Letherby. And question for Mel and Tim. As I was listening, there was an amazing energy between the two of you. And similarly, when Dan and Ken got up, there was almost sparkles. I could see stars sparkle. That's what I felt. I wonder how you're able to nurture and develop that as you are writing, because I anticipate there would be disagreements as well. But how were you able to?
The book said the word, it said nurture.
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 Yeah.
So that's
That phrase that you used there is going to be in the presentation. Quoted as we quoted.
well, that's where we come from, isn't it? I guess.
What the nurture?
The nurture,
Yeah.
the idea of it. Yeah.
I don't think there are a couple of things that we kind of have minor discussion about, but the way in which we put that piece together was to write separately, independently about our experience of the nurturing conversations that we've been having over the last 18 months, and then we blended both of those, and then we blended again. And actually, it was only there was a lot of similarity in what we wrote. And I think the third piece we put together came about 20 minutes.
Yeah.
So yeah, to get it down to 8 was quite a challenge. But there was a lot of commonality, and there was just a little bit of, there was something that I didn't want in there. And so he said, no, this is one we have to do now. It's going on somewhere. The break and silver and Alan bit, and no, that's going to be in there. It means that's about.
Imagine not having intense field of gold on.
And my write for that was done as a pre-write one morning back in May. It was just a 10-minute pre-write and okay.
But that said, that comes on the back of almost a year of exchanging poetry. So you got some bits of it in there, about half of the set, I guess, that we did for Coracle.
Yeah.
It's been a bit more since then as well. But the thing that we read at the beginning is more recent. So I wrote a poem about the Boys Brigade, and then you wrote a poem about the Browns and wove it in line by line all the way through. But it's a small segment. I thought it's quite a long. So even if it's long.
A poem of mine that sounds on its own, but was inspired by it being that time of year when I had a photograph from taking the Browns years ago. It was about the same time that James sentiment. But yeah, there's I was going to say shut up. There's been more kind of curiosity and interest and engagement than argument and debates.
Yeah.
And sometimes I don't understand what we talk about.
That's true.
That's probably.
There's a sort of chanting up that takes place as well, because like I said, we don't meet very often in person. So we met for the first time in person a year ago at Bristol, and then about 2-3 months ago we met up in Sheffield, But otherwise, we live really far apart. It's not going out very often. It's generally very exciting because we do spend quite a lot of time in each other's company.
Yeah,
There aren't many
yeah.
people I want to spend a lot of time in company else, to be honest. But it's definitely one. So it's ready, you know, it's just
Yeah.
like, oh, you're here, let's go, you know. Doing this now, one shot. Yeah.
No, it's an hour of, well, it's quite loosely flowing. I do something similar with a colleague friend of mine, and we're quite structured. We have an hour and we manage that time. Maybe Tim and I don't manage that time so well.
I'll get better at it.
Yeah.
I have a question for the whole panel. I want to firstly thank you for all the work. It was all really beautiful. And I thought that the synergies were also really amazing between all the presentations. This is kind of building on the last question in a sense. I thought a lot during your presentations about autoethnography as a tool for care and attending to. And I think you all did that in different ways in your papers. And it made me think about a theoretical framework I use a lot called non-representational theory. Nigel Thrift, Philip Manini, but Aaron Manning also writes into non-representation theory at times. But I think autoethnography, in the way that you presented it today, does that in a very particular way. And so I wondered if any of you could comment on how, you know, the radical, maybe the radical or not so radical potential of autoethnography as you're using it as an enactment, not a performance of, but an enactment, an action of care, rather than representing some story in a particular way.
Can I respond to that? I was working for my PhD. I was working with 8 participants, and I was the 9th participant in the study. And we had group meetings that I recorded and transcribed, and then in between the meetings they had writing tasks. They wrote autobiographical stories, autoethnographical stories, and the incidental therapeutic bonus experience of that group. It was I'm a therapist. Anyway, but so my supervisor was very strict about the fact that this is not a therapy group.
Yeah.
I'm not the therapist of that group, and therefore, and I was a full participant. Therefore, I made sure that I didn't actively offer a therapeutic space.
Yeah.
But the incidental experience was very therapeutic. And I think, so of course, I think many people share the idea that autoethnographic and autobiographical work is deeply therapeutic in itself, but also witnessing my group and how I created a space for their voices and through the writing and the speaking, because those are my 2 data sets that I'm using in the study. I think it's a direct indication of what you said.
Thank you. Thanks.
Yeah, I can certainly relate to that. My participants were students in the operating theatre, so some of their experiences were really painful.
Yeah.
And there was no way forward to go. So a couple of them wrote back to me after we'd done some interviews and writing and said thank you. They found it very profound.
I've tried to use it in autoethnographic. I have used autoethnographic means in the classroom, secondary and undergraduate nursing students, to explore their motivations for their interests in particular topics in relation to evidence-based practice, because there's an unspoken driver behind what we gravitate towards in practice, I think, I believe. And it bore varied fruits, but when it was good, it was very good. And those practitioners are probably more robust now for that, less fearful of the mechanics of evidence-based practice, the sort of technical bits of literature certainly and stuff, but also have a better sense of where they're going. So I had quite a long, after I've run this module,
Yeah,
and I've just caught up with those students again recently, and at the time, they all hated me for making them do this very difficult work, you know, and they use video to record a reflexive presentation of their motivations for being interested in a particular topic and why they would need to consider other people in a particular way that made them think about why they were, you know, considering themselves in that milieu as well. And they're all now, I think, a bit more appreciative of it. This is about playing a long game, isn't it? It's like, I don't want to get into that thing we were doing last night. The institution is like playing a long game, you know. So, but for you can see that, and then of course, as an active care for yourself as well, because you can see the evidence that you are.
totally. But that's quite a radical proposition when you look at the ethnographic part of the practice, you know, and its commitment to, you know, cultural, like traditional ethnographic practice.
Yeah.
Which is, you know, I mean, a colonial project in some sense. And
Yeah.
many people feel that its time is past now, and it's predicated upon the practice of representing, in most cases, an entire group of people through the interaction with very few. So I think to try and do autobiographic work that is culturally responsive work, but that is, I don't know, you know, not representative, can be a real disruption. Thank you all. Thank you.
Miriam, did you want to respond to that?
Just that it feels a big responsibility to be doing this kind of work, knowing that there's still a lot of sort of people that will dismiss it, and you feel a responsibility to ethnography itself somehow to do justice to it. And obviously there's care for yourself and the people that you're writing about, even though you can make them creative, make them compass itself, but there's still a stance that you've got to have care for what you're doing and who you're involved in.
No.
Can I say something? Yes, you want it? Related to question, because I had a profound experience as a teacher in pharmacy during the pandemic. We had it was the first time I was going to teach ophthalmology, and the pandemic came. It took my university a couple of months to figure out how we would do that online, because people couldn't. I mean, a lot of people didn't have computers. They had to distribute computers. It was crazy. But I was like, come on, I need to do something that I can't go to the university. So I contacted the students and said, what do you think of like having a class? And then we figure out, you know, doing stuff. And everybody was like, yeah. So we had this, everybody would have their own project. But because we were in Brazil, you know, with all the politics, no vaccines, and I said, how about if we do this as a project of our experience living in Brazil during the pandemic, right? So that became our project. It was one of the most amazing teaching experiences that I had, because it became very therapeutic for all of us, you know, talking through that, and you know, through the anthropology, not talk about our own experience, but how that related to the politics, you know, the country of the world. Anyway, that became a paper. And the student was a student's paper. I'm part of it, but and most of the paper is about how therapeutic that was for them. It was like their experience. It was really cool. I mean, I had no idea that would happen, but it was really interesting.
It would be great if we could share that paper with the group. Maybe they could send it.
They published in Brazil. It's a very nice journal, but they also publish in English, so we have Portuguese. So yeah, so I can share.
Yeah, but just as I was listening to you, I was thinking about one of the most exciting pieces of work that I've been involved with is running some writing sessions, creative literature sessions with a group of architecture students, architecture students at the Centre for Alternative Technology in Wales. And they have a module called Essay in Place. And that a lot of it builds towards a visit to St Agnes to the Fragments Museum of Wales, where they really get into the fabric and the structure and the history and the land from which the buildings come. And I take them through some activities which really helps them connect with where they come from, and then that might be talking to your students about why they want to do architecture. And that really helps them, because I believe that will help them connect with their clients when they move out into architectural practice, and makes them better architects and makes them more imaginative and creative in their writing. As well. So I just think I'm not necessarily coming from an orthographic perspective, but I just think it's so important to, and I wish I realised it sooner when I was doing my masters, thinking about where we come from and why we find ourselves in this place.
We are on time, but thank you, everybody. Great panel. Just to say, there's some nice comments on the chat as well. We might want to look at.